Hey guys, just a really quick disclaimer. This episode actually contains some adult and sensitive material, so be aware.
And I love your podcast. I listened to one episode that I think was audio, and then I watched Lynn.
Lynn Smith?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a great interview.
Thank you. Guys, I'm super excited to introduce you to Kristin Casey. She is the author of Rock Monster, My Life with Joe Walsh. She is a fascinating individual. She's a writer, she's an intimacy coach, and she is someone that really understands the true dynamics of personal relationships and is trying to help people understand how to connect it at a deeper, more authentic level. She's got some new projects coming up I'm sure we'll dig into, but she is just a really fascinating individual. I'm super excited she agreed to be on the Ripple Effect podcast. So let's dive right in. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Ripple Effect podcast. I am super excited to introduce you to Kristin Casey. Kristin, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
I'm excited to have you. I mean, it is kind of odd. You and I have actually known each other a little bit through Facebook for a while now, but we're both in Austin, but we've actually never seen each other face to face. And we're in the same town. I guess we probably could have done this live, but it's great to see you.
Yeah, you too. I'm glad we were getting to do it at all. And Austin's grown so much that honestly, it's become a big city somehow.
It has, yeah. And, so, even seeing people in the city is a little bit of a challenge these days, just getting from one end to the other. I mean, you went to college here, so you kind of have the same appreciation I do. I moved here in 93 and the city is just vastly different than it was back then.
You moved here when? In 93?
In 93, yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's crazy different. And I moved here in 86. Yeah. No, 85.
85.
And it's completely different. And you used to run into people that you knew all the time, and you still do, kind of in crazy places. I mean, it does still have a little bit of that small town vibe. Like you might be in a grocery store somewhere, or like for me, an AA meeting, and I'll run into someone from 30 years ago I thought was dead. But we're all about 1 degree of separation from each other. I'll bump into you at HEB one of these days.
Yeah, I'm sure we're definitely gonna do it. If not, we're gonna make it a point to get coffee for sure. So I'm super excited to have you for this show, because I think all the work that you're doing. I know really I sort of want to just describe you as a really forward-thinking writer in a lot of ways. I know you're working on some new projects, and we'll come back to the book Rock Monster to talk a little bit about that. But I really would like to give my audience a sense of kind of who you are, kind of where you started. I'm really big about the origin story of people that sort of informs kind of who they become as later on in their life and as adults. Could you give our audience just a little brief background about where you came from, sort of how you ended up on this path that you're on now?
Yeah, sure. So how I ended up on this path. I was born in San Diego to what was really a typical middle class family. My parents were pretty religious, and we were slightly upwardly mobile. We every 5 years we got a slightly bigger house, and we had a really nice life in San Diego. We went water skiing every weekend. We went to church every Sunday, and I think I went to church twice a week because I went to Catholic schools. But there was no physical abuse. My mother was kind of hypercritical, and so she and I had a really rough time of it. And a lot of my insecurities and this tuning out of my emotions kind of started back then. That's really what led to my alcoholism and my addictions. And then, we had this big move when I was a teenager, and we went from this really beautiful home in San Diego where I just started making friends at 15 and fitting in. It's a hard time at 15.
That's a tough age. Yeah.
Right? So, and then all of a sudden, halfway through my high school years, I'm finally starting to kind of feel like I'm get a sense of identity a little bit. And then we were uprooted and moved to the panhandle of Texas. And it was really sudden, and it was really awful. My father went bankrupt. And so, everybody handled it probably better than I probably handled it the worst of everyone, but it was just such a shock to the system. And I started drinking as a way to manage, because, I was in a new town, and I was a punk rock chick, and there was like one other punk rocker in the whole panhandle of Texas. And thank God for him, because we became best friends like overnight.
That's good.
Yeah. But we also were binge drinkers, both of us. So we just drank away our sorrows every Friday and Saturday. So by the time I got to Austin a couple years later to go to UT, I mean, I was a serious hardcore drinker. And, I did well in high school because I really loved school, but I was so intimidated by the size of UT, almost 50,000 students or something at that time. And I had so little belief in myself, and my relationship with the parents had deteriorated, through my teen years. And so I really felt completely all alone in the world, completely lost at UT. I really wanted to be a writer. I had wanted to be a writer since I was 11 or 13. In fact, I'll tell you that story. When I was 11, I read a book of short stories by Roald Dahl. And 2 of those short stories were nonfiction. They were like personal essays, like memoir type pieces. And I loved the whole book. I read it over and over again. And at 13 and at 11, I remember thinking, especially because of those 2 personal essays, because that's what I write, is memoir. Yep. I remember thinking, God, I would love to do this someday. I really would love to be a writer. But I didn't really, at 11, I was already insecure. I didn't think I could do it. And then at 13, I read The World According to Garp. And I loved that book so much. I was so amazed by how he just, everything connected, and the metaphor, just the beautiful use of metaphor. And I just decided at 13, I want to do this. I want to be a writer. Wow. And so by the time I got to UT, I decided I wanted to be a screenwriter, which to this day I still do. I'm still pursuing that. But I was such an alcoholic, and I started hanging out with sort of the drug addicted faction of the punk scene, because there was a lot of really cool punks, a lot of them who were straight edge, didn't use, and there were kind of friends of mine right from the get-go too. But I gravitated, because I just had the self-destructive streak in me, towards the speed freaks. And I very quickly became a speed freak myself. And by the end of my first semester, I was addicted to intravenous meth. Oh, it was a very, very fast, hard tumble. Oh, and so I dropped out of UT and tumbled a bit further. And then I just woke up one day, right? I was so out of it after binging, like a 3-day binge. I'm driving down the wrong side of the road with my headlights out, and I almost have a head-on collision. And that was kind of my wake-up call. And I quit doing drugs on my own, and I realized I have to get my act together. So I started going to ACC, community college, but I had to pay back all these student loans and grants, and I had no job. And so I'd spent all my grant money on meth, on drugs. And so a neighbor told me about this strip club. He said, not that I think you're that kind of girl, but I mean, if you need money fast, and I couldn't get it, I had rent to pay. So I started stripping, fell in love with it, quit hard drugs completely, used, little acid, little mushrooms, which if, you're from Austin, we got here in the 90s, but in the 80s, that was not really considered drug taking. Yeah. The way I was doing. I mean, ecstasy was still legal. But I quit hard drugs. And then around that time, a couple years into dancing, my drinking did, kind of get worse, because it was basically replacing meth with alcohol. Yeah. But I was doing well in school, and I was kind of slowly getting my act together. And then I met this rock star who was coming through town, and we fell in love really quickly. And so I started traveling with him and dropped out of school again, and eventually moved in with him, started going to school. So I moved in with him in LA, started going to college again. And then he invited me to Japan. He's touring all over the world. There was a trip to Japan. I dropped out of school for a 3rd time. And at that point, I'd probably written a couple of short stories, maybe a few poems. I think one of the stories was probably pretty good. One of them was probably pretty bad. And then I had all the freedom in the world. He bought me a fabulous electronic typewriter, and I couldn't write a word, because as soon as I moved in with him, I became a raging cocaine addict. So now I'm a raging alcoholic, a raging cocaine addict. And then I think within less than a year, I'd blown a hole in my septum. So I started, in order to preserve what was left of my nose, I started smoking crack instead of snorting coke. And so within a few years of that, like, my boyfriend had had enough. We were fighting all the time. We really were in love. We were engaged, but it had gotten really ugly. And this is the book that I detail in the story that I detail in my book. So we broke up, and I moved to Vegas and started stripping again, and spiraling really, really badly. Now, I had quit the coke and the crack because I didn't have my rock star's money. Right. To pay for it anymore. And so, but I was drinking myself to death. I mean, like, purposely drinking myself to death, because what happened when we broke up was that I realized I had completely lost my sense of identity. I'd given up my writing, which, you know, was in its infancy, but still something I was really passionate
Yeah.
about. And at the time, really the thing that I felt like the only thing that I was capable of doing. And the only thing that I really loved, the only thing that kind of gave me purpose. And I mean, aside from stripping, and obviously that's not a lifelong career.
Yeah.
So I just felt like the hole in the donut, as they say. I mean, I just felt like if I wasn't Joe, his name was Joe Walsh,
Yep.
for the Eagles. And I thought if I wasn't Joe Walsh's girlfriend anymore, then who was I? I was just wasting space. You know, I just had no identity at all and no belief in myself. And so I decided to drink myself to death. And I spent the next couple of years trying to do that. And, you know, clearly it didn't work. I had sort of an epiphany one morning as I had alcohol poisoning, really, really bad. So bad I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. I was just projectile vomiting over and over all morning and just kind of waiting for myself to die that day. And then,
Wow.
as I laid there all day wondering when it was going to happen, I started thinking about this, you know, whole plan that I had put into place about drinking myself to death. And it just, you know, kind of hit me like this epiphany, like this is not how I meant to go. Because the truth is I always believed in some kind of higher power. You know, I didn't really have much. It wasn't the God that my Catholic parents had given me, but I believed in something. And I knew that I was put here. I believe that we were all put here with some sort of purpose. And I thought, well, I've clearly, whatever mine was, I've ruined, I've blown it. But life is a gift, and I'm going to have to try again. I'm going to have to try to find a way to get sober and try again and see if I can just make something out of this life. And
Was there a moment at that point that really sort of made that message come through to you? Or was it, what really made that shift for you in that moment, do you think?
you know, as I was laying there, because I probably had woken up around 8 or 9 o'clock that morning, and there was a clock on the wall with a second hand, and so I could actually test my heart rate, and it was over 200 like all morning long.
Wow.
And I was pretty sure that wasn't sustainable. I was pretty sure that that's why I might die, because I couldn't talk. I mean, it just felt like I might die.
And you're alone this whole time, really? At that point?
I was at home.
Oh, you were alone at that point?
Alone. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I was at
Gosh.
my best friend's house, but he had left first thing in the morning, and he saw me kind of come to as he was leaving, and he recognized that something was wrong, and he kept asking him, do I need to take you to the hospital? And I just kept shaking my head no. And he knew what I was doing. He knew I was trying to take myself to death. And so, and he couldn't afford to lose his job, so he had to go, not knowing if he was going to come back to a dead body or not. But he also knew that's what I wanted. And so as I was laying there, one of the first thoughts that came to me after a while was, why am I not happier about this? You know, I should be excited. This is what I've been pursuing for 2 years. And that question made me start to give it a lot of thought. And that's when I started thinking about, you know, there's some sort of higher intelligence that put me here. I have a purpose. I've probably blown it. But I also thought, what if reincarnation is real? This was probably the strangest thought, but it was the thought that actually probably pushed me over to this side of the fence of like, all right, maybe I'll try a different way. It's because I thought, if there's such a thing as reincarnation, I'm going to be born with all the exact same problems I have right now, only I'm going to have to go through high school again.
Yep. No, don't.
That just seems like too much to ask.
Yeah.
So, I just really, it was like a veil was lifted from my eyes. And, you know, maybe it was divine intervention. Maybe it was a spiritual experience. Maybe it was just my rational thinking coming back. Because I wasn't able to drink. I drank 24/7. I drank the second I got up to the second I passed out every day. So that was the longest I'd gone without a drink in, months at least.
Wow.
And so maybe just this rational thought was able to finally get through. I'm not exactly sure, but I called a friend of mine that I stripped with, who I knew was sober. She was out of town, but she told me where to go to a meeting. It took me a couple of days before I could get out of bed. But I went there, and I hated everything I heard. I thought these people were crazy. I was like, y'all are talking about hope and forgiveness and willingness. Like, I'm dying here, people. How are you? I need some practical advice on how to not drink. But I also kept going back because I had nowhere else to go. And they also seemed to think that I wasn't a horrible the horrible person I thought I was, and they seemed to think that they could help me. And I just kept going back. And after a couple of months, I thought, well, I'll work these 12 steps, probably prove they don't work, and then I could drink myself to death with a clear conscience. And then, of course, funny enough, they worked, and I never drank again. So in that first day, when I made that decision, okay, if I live through the day, I'm gonna call my friend and try out that AA thing. From that moment forward, I knew I needed to find a purpose in my life, because I wasn't gonna make it otherwise. I was gonna end up right back there in that bed, you know, half dead. Because without a purpose, there's no point in living. And I mean, I suppose there are people who live without a purpose, but they seem pretty miserable to me.
Yeah.
So I just started trying to figure out what my mission in life was, what I was good at, what I was meant to do. And that was a really long haul, because I still wasn't very, I still had no confidence. I still had a huge self-esteem issues. I still had a lot of self-loathing that I had to work through. So, I started getting a lot of therapy. I moved back to Austin. I got out of the sex industry temporarily, because at the time I had no boundaries, so it wasn't a healthy place for me. And that's not to say that it can't be done in a healthy way, because I really do believe it can, and I've done it in healthy ways since then. I went back to stripping in my late 30s for a while, but at the time it wasn't healthy for me. So I got into real estate, started running, started working out, going to a lot of meetings, just really trying to rebuild my body, because I had done a tremendous amount of damage. Some of it permanent, but nothing life-threatening, thankfully. And so and then a few years into sobriety, I was back in Austin, maybe 5 years into sobriety, and I realized I was miserable. And I was writing like short stories. Again, I wasn't showing them to anyone, and I was writing very slowly. And I was trying to also start a book, and I was writing that very slowly. And it's mostly because it was just, when you don't believe that you can do something, it's very hard to make yourself sit in front of the computer or wherever, your workbench or whatever, and make yourself do it. But I live in Austin, right? Well, this is a town full of creatives. Thank God. Like that, it has been such a godsend, such a blessing to me, because one thing I love more than anything is live music and going out dancing. So I realized 5 years into sobriety, I'm miserable. All I do is work and run and work out and go to meetings and help other women get sober. And that's, that's gratifying. But there's no joy in my life. There's no fun in my life. So I started going out dancing, and I started meeting a lot of musicians and people at the shows, making friends. And so this kind of leads to my second path. Around this time, I slowly start writing more, because I thought, if these songwriters I'm meeting can be putting themselves out there in front of audiences, big or small, in coffee shops or Antone's or wherever, I mean, I can at least put pen to paper and not show it to somebody. I just felt like if they can do it, and I was making friends with them, and they were very encouraging, and they were photographers and writers and songwriters and artists of all kind. And so I really allowed myself to start talking to people. So this is kind of the second path I was talking about. Like, what my day job right now, even though I'm on hiatus as I write my second book, is intimacy coaching. And when I first got sober, I had this huge, just tremendous fear of intimacy, partly because I felt like I'd lost myself in my ex. And if I had trouble making friends, because I had a lot of, self-loathing still, and a lot of self-esteem issues. And so you don't, necessarily want to see and be seen in the way that you need to do to make genuine friends, right? You want to hide yourself. You want to show them a certain, just one aspect of yourself.
You put on a mask, certain airs for certain people, right?
Exactly. And that's no way to really establish genuine intimacy, neither with friends or romantically. And that was the other thing. Like, I was desperate for, companionship and romantic connection. And quite frankly, I had a high sex drive. I really wanted some of that too, but I couldn't, that was even harder for me. Making friends was hard, but allowing myself to see and be seen intimately in a way to date someone or have a boyfriend was next to impossible for me. So again, this wonderful live music scene was so helpful in that area, because, it's where a lot of people go to meet members of the opposite sex, or whatever sex you're into, I guess, and to start dating. And so I slowly started putting my toe in the water in that way. And there was, as far as my path to become an intimacy coach, I would say, 12 or 15 years later, what I did was I decided I need to learn how to do this. So I'm just going to go out. I'm going to put myself out there. If I see a guy that I like, I'm going to try to introduce myself or learn how to flirt, because if you've only ever flirted, and I was really good at flirting when I was drinking, but sober was like a whole different experience, right? It's completely different. I had no idea how to do it. I was terrible at it. It would either come on too strong or not strong enough. And just, I didn't know how to reject someone politely. So I'd end up on dates with guys that I didn't even like. And basically I spent the next number of years, I don't know, 5 years maybe, making every single dating, sex, and intimacy mistake in the book, and just dusting myself off, getting over the embarrassment of it and doing it again.
Well, let me ask you. So what were those steps that you took in order to overcome that at that time? Were you finally starting to find your inner fire, your confidence, and recognize that you had something significant to give to other people that you were with, friendship or otherwise?
I would say little by little, like, people found me interesting. If I would, there were some really nice people who would go to see the same bands that I would go to. And I could tell they could even see that I was fragile, and were actually very confident people who went out of their way to make me feel,
included, probably, right?
Included, yes, and interesting, and like I was enjoyable company. And then, social media started to become big, and I found that, well, if I can't show people my writing, I can post my poetry on my MySpace blog, and maybe someone will stumble on it and not think it's horrible. And then all of a sudden, all these people found it and started telling me how much they liked it. And for the first time, accidentally, I got all this positive feedback on my writing.
Yep.
And that gave me the confidence to put more of my writing out there. And then, so social media actually helped me make friends too, because it was a really helpful way for a shy introvert with low self-esteem to kind of slowly put yourself out there. I mean, there's a lot of problems with social media, but it's also incredibly helpful in a lot of ways. So there was that. And then as far as dating, I mean, like I said, I had a very high motivation to get that part of my life right. Like I really, it's a very big, it's always been sex and dating have always been a very important part of my life. So, I would just kind of keep trying. I was constantly meeting people, because when you go in to see different bands, different guys will come up to you. And so I was constantly meeting people. And if I would face plant, if I would say something embarrassing or get rejected, put myself out there and that I like this guy, and then get rejected, or maybe we'd have a fling, but it was just a fling to him and I'd really fall for him, and that hurt. Again, you just dust yourself off and try again. But, I was in therapy. I was going to, 12-step meetings at the time, which was very helpful. I was in talk therapy, one-on-one talk therapy. I did group therapy for a while. And 12-step meetings are a form of group therapy. Yeah. I journaled constantly. I'm a huge believer in journaling, especially as a writer,
Yeah.
But I even at one point realized I'm going to stop journaling about everything going on in my life and only journal about the interactions with potential friends, whether they're going well or going badly, like how it went. And then I'll have like a record of my patterns. And years later, I went back and started reading all these journals. And let me tell you, the patterns, my ridiculous patterns of making boys chase me, or being too forward and then making them chase me. Just they jumped off the page like you wouldn't believe, like it was laughable. I just thought I should have read these as I was writing them, but you can't really see it so much.
Right.
So I believe in, talk therapy and journaling are two really big ones for me. And as a writer or a creative, I guess any creative, putting your stuff out there on the internet to fellow artists.
Yeah.
I joined this one incredible, I don't know if it's still around, but at the time it was an incredible short story critique community called Zoetrope, which Francis Ford Coppola, I think, started.
Really?
Yeah. And so I thought, well, I want to get my short stories critiqued, and I don't want to show them to any of my new friends yet. Some of my artist and musician friends were like the best in the business here in Austin. Like you would know their names. Like I wasn't going to show them my little poems and short stories quite yet. So I put a few of them on. You have to critique some others. And as a writer, critiquing other people's work is actually really helpful. It teaches you how to become better, right? So workshopping stuff, right? And so I put some of my stuff out there, and I would get, if I got 5 reviews on one of my short stories, 3 of them would invariably be great. One would rip me to shreds, and one would be neutral.
Yeah.
And so I think a part of it is putting yourself out there. Like I've said that a few times, right? When it comes to making friends, when it comes to dating, or, showing interest in a guy, And when it comes to as a writer, or any work situation, putting yourself out there.
Yeah.
So I mean, in a way, you could call it a form of networking. What I was doing,
Yeah.
just trying to make friends in the creative community. And I was going to poetry readings. Oh my God. And that was one of the hardest things ever. But I read somewhere, because I didn't write a lot of poetry, but sometimes I'd be writing something in a short story and it would come out kind of poetic. And I think, oh, I'll take that little phrase and I'll make a poem out of it. And I started writing so much around 2004, 5, 6. That stuff, I mean, I'd go in the shower and a whole poem would come out, or I'd go to bed and a whole scene for my book would come out, or half of a short story, or the ending to the short story that I hadn't been able to figure. It's just, you kick your brain into gear when you surround yourself with creative people and you apply yourself. Like, I was very dedicated. I wrote every minute I wasn't working or dancing, I was writing. Right?
Yeah.
I didn't sleep very much. I had like 4 hours of sleep a night. One of the reasons I was able to write as much as I did and work 60 hours a week was because I had terrible insomnia. So it was actually quite beneficial to me. But, just being dedicated to your craft, networking, putting yourself out there, and just allowing yourself to, face plant once in a while and just say, hey, I'm human,
Yeah.
and hopefully you're surrounded by good people who also say, hey, she's human,
Yeah.
they don't make fun of you. And finding ways to like workshop your stuff. And so it was, as I went through that process, I started getting a few things published. And then I went to those poetry readings where I had read poems don't come to life until they're read out loud. Somebody has to hear them, kind of like a tree does when a tree falls in the forest. Does anyone hear it? And the truth is that nothing comes to life until someone hears it. Nothing written, I guess, or at least poetry. So I started going to these poetry readings, and I have a huge fear. I'm very nervous right now. I don't like being on camera. I don't even like doing interviews on the phone with some obscure, radio station, with a local radio station in the middle of Kentucky or something. Like, I get very nervous.
Well, you and I have that in common. It's the introverted shyness in us, right? That makes it very uncomfortable, but nobody would know that seeing you because you're confident and you have amazing presence, right? You have confidence that comes across, and, certainly your story is your story, right? So, you know that better than anything, but at the end of the day, I can see where the quiet confidence was building with your writing and the approach to bringing it to the world. There's so much that our audience will learn from this because it's so powerful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. At the time I was just trying to put one foot in front of the other. And I remember when I went to my first poetry reading, just sweating buckets, knowing that at some point I was going to have to raise my hand, right?
Yeah.
But I also recognized in that moment, just like going to a 12-step meeting or or hitting the dance floor, like, everybody else is nervous too. Everybody else at that poetry reading, there are those weird people who can get up in front of a podium and read their own poetry. I don't know where they come from. They're aliens. But 90% of us were like terrified. And then you applaud, and then you talk to them afterwards and say, oh, I really liked that poem about, your cat or whatever.
Yeah.
So supporting others comes back to you. And I only went to like 6 or so of those poetry readings, and I don't even remember the names of any of those people. But at the time, we were like this community. And by the 5th or 6th one, I'd walk in and we'd all be hugging each other and happy to see each other. So having that kind of supportive community is really important. And then
you found your tribe, right? In a certain, at a pivotal time, in a pivotal way, you found the people that are going to be there to support you. And that's the great thing, right? What's that? Say that again.
And you support them in return.
That's right. Yeah.
You have to kind of go into this knowing that it's a reciprocal thing. And it also helps you get out of yourself, like you go somewhere and maybe you have a product that you're selling or something you're trying to pitch, whether it's your friendship or your, your widget. And maybe you get talking to a couple of people. If you're just focused on what you're trying to get across, you're going to be nervous, right? But if you engage with the other people and start asking them about them, you get out of your head, you get out of yourself, And I find that's one of the best ways to get out of nervousness,
I
right?
agree. Yeah, absolutely. It's a heck of a great tip for sure. How much of that sort of that confidence that was quietly building as you were finding your tribe, finding your voice, right? Which is sort of ironic as we record this. One of the things that I do is I have a Ripple membership that we have folks that belong, and every month that we do the membership has a different theme. And this month, actually, for November, happens to be finding your voice. So it's so ironic that we're doing this because this, as most of my interviews are, they're fairly unplanned and sort of organic. So the fact that you're bringing this up at this time is really, it just totally makes me smile. But how much of what you experienced in sort of your counseling and the AA steps that you were going through and following those meetings, how much of that was informing some of the chances you were taking to put yourself out there and to really live with a different lens?
Oh, I would say just quite a bit. First I want to say, I know there are a lot of people who are able to get sober without the 12 steps, and good for them. I think that's
Yeah.
fantastic. When I got sober, it was really the only thing available. And thankfully it worked for me. Like
Yeah.
it worked really well. It was what I needed. Because the 12 steps represent these 12 timeless principles, like surrender, forgiveness, acceptance, restitution, prayer and meditation, being of service, honesty. Like these are timeless principles that I really
Yeah.
needed to learn.
Yeah.
And they gave me a foundation with which to live the rest of my life. So I don't actually go to meetings hardly ever anymore. Like occasionally I'll go, and if a friend of mine, if I'm with a friend who wants to go, I'll go, or a friend of mine wants to get sober, I'll take them. But the 12 steps I've integrated into my life, and I was doing it back then. I learned
Yeah.
back then, like, inventorying your resentments and fear. That's a really big one. That's like mainly steps 4 and 5.
Yep.
And so for me, it was, I had a lot of resentments, and I really was inventorying them on a regular basis. Every time I'd feel one of them rise up. But the fear is what was blocking me from making friends, from dating more successfully, from dating to the point where I could actually have a healthy boyfriend relationship. And so I was constantly inventorying my fear, like, where is this coming from? What's driving it? What do I feel is being threatened right now? My emotional security, my goal, what is it? So like, there's a very specific process for how you inventory your fears. And so for me, I was like working that step just mentally,
Yeah.
in my own mind and with my sponsor, like just constantly. Because once you're able to really analyze your fears, it takes a lot of the power away from them.
Yeah.
Once you see where they're coming from, and you can forgive yourself for having that. If you're having a fear because you're insecure about your value as a person, that's not the first thing that comes to mind when you're all of a sudden nervous when you meet a guy that you like. But if you can take a step back and go, I'm just being insecure because I have a little bit of a low self-worth in this area, and I don't have enough successes piled up next to my rejections or whatever. And it just takes, and there's ways to sort of self-talk. You just learn ways to bring yourself to sort of center yourself in the moment. And so
Yeah.
to me, that, the steps to, but honestly, a good therapist should be able to help you do that. Right.
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
or a good Google search could help you. I mean, you can Google how to do that.
It's true. Yeah.
But yeah, just getting a handle on my fears and where they were coming from was a big deal.
Well, and you make a really good point. I mean, a lot of the things that we sort of compartmentalize and we put off in that dark, recesses of our mind and our heart, right? They're hard to pull out, but when you shine a light on them and you start to really take them on, it becomes empowering to be able to start to realize, hey, these are things I can overcome. These are things that I can I can get beyond actually. And really, a lot of times, how much of what we've continued to pull and hold inside, is seated in the past of experiences or past bad relationships or comments or things that people have said or done to us, that is just so freeing when you can release that, right? It's like a whole new world of opportunity opens up to you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, because they create these neural pathways that become your default
Yep.
thought process,
Yeah.
right? And so if you can build some new neural pathways, and reinforce those through more and more positive experiences, then you're golden. And that's what I do largely as an intimacy coach, right? Like I get a lot of guys who come in here with these very same insecure, like I get a lot of later life virgins or guys who, whether it's just dating coaching they need or intimacy coaching where they struggle to see and be seen or to get close to somebody and it's affecting their sexual performance. Sometimes that's another issue on top of that. A lot of times it's because they were bullied in high school or they moved around a lot or they had a really embarrassing interaction in high school or college, or they were othered somehow. And so those neural pathways get set and then they just start to create this pattern and then that pattern repeats. And so they'll come to me and through a series of sessions, I'll start to help them have positive experiences, talking to a woman, flirting with a woman, learning some seduction techniques, learning how to touch and be touched. There's a lot of touch that's exchanged in my intimacy coaching sessions. And what that does is it creates these new neural pathways.
Yeah.
And it gives them, I teach them some skills to go out in the world so they can, try them out on, women of their choosing. I usually work mostly with men.
Yeah.
And typically straight men. So, and then what you have to do is just repetition at that point. You have to, because you have a lot of negative repetition, you have some positive. And so it takes time, right? You can't, some guys kind of seem to turn around overnight, but those guys generally had some sort of, like a divorce, maybe like they were doing really well and then they had a really difficult divorce. And so they had this one incident that over the course of a year kind of really threw them for a loop. And so they kind of need to get back on track. And then I have other guys, most of my clients, who they're dealing with a lifetime of rejection or caving to fear or getting stuck in that really negative neural pathway that says, attraction leads to rejection or arousal leads to rejection or embarrassment or, whatever. And we do a lot of exercises in session where interaction and flirting and touch leads to pleasure and leads to intimacy and leads to connection. And so it's a lot of repetition in session and then they go out and repeat it. And so, yeah, I think a lot of people would probably be less hard on themselves if they realize this isn't just you being a big dork. This is a neural pathway in your brain that you don't have a lot of control over.
Yeah.
You need some help, some really focused attention to help you just rewire your brain a little bit. And it's very plastic, but we need help oftentimes doing that.
Yeah. Well, I kind of liken it to when I work with coaching clients that have really almost, I get a lot of individuals that are looking to get to their next level of their career, or they're trying to create better leadership teams, or they've got challenges with their relationships. And a lot of times it almost always comes down to sort of those repeated patterns that have just been reinforced. Right. And I kind of liken it to the vinyl record that got the scratch. Once it's there, it's just constant. You got to find a way to, to reseat that record. You've got to create, like you said, those new neural pathways to overcome the behavior that they always default to. And it's tough. It's easier said than done, right? But a lot of times it comes with practice. It comes with a committed, partner like yourself that's there reinforcing and supporting and guiding, what a good coach does, right? You don't tell, but you inform and you guide and direct and sort of inform of different approaches and strategies that they can take to really have better, more positive outcomes. And clearly that's why you're successful at what you do now. What do you think for this is kind of a direction for your career path? What's the most rewarding aspect of that? Is seeing people make those breakthroughs and find, the possibilities of life?
Yeah, you said it in a nutshell. The thing is, I have always believed, for myself personally, and probably for most other people, like I can't speak for everyone, but intimacy to me makes life worth living. It really does. I'm not somebody who, I'm single most of the time. I like being single. So I don't have like a husband. I don't have kids. I'm not into kids. Like sometimes that is what's most rewarding to a person. But to me, intimacy is what makes life worth living. And whether that's with, whether that's short term or long term or very fleeting. And I mean emotional intimacy but also physical intimacy. Like they're both, to me, I want them both. They need them both.
Yeah.
And so knowing that's one of the reasons I was so tenacious, because I was never born and especially resilient person. I would say quite the opposite, which is why I became an addict. But I was tenacious. So when I would face plant, when I would really like a guy and it would blow up in my face somehow, which happens frequently. The second book that I'm writing is actually it's all about these stories, this me face planting all through my 30s until I met this incredible guy and had this incredible relationship. And then it's a lot about that relationship. So it's about dating, sex, and intimacy and relationships. But where was I? Oh, so I went through my 30s without an intimacy coach, just doing it on my own, right? And when I would face plant, I would dust myself off because what were my options? To become an introverted cat lady? I mean, that's not me. That's not,
that's not you. Yeah.
I wanted dating. I wanted sex. I wanted companionship. I wanted it all. So I would keep going. And I finally, slowly figured it out and worked it out. And all of a sudden I just, I'm the one area in my life I'm probably have supreme confidence is really in relationships. Yeah. I mean, I can't do an interview without getting nervous. I can't write a book without stressing out completely about every word. But I can, I'm probably going dancing. I can hit the floor and not think twice about it. And I can go up to any guy that I'm interested in and just start talking. But it took me 10 straight years to learn that. So when I have someone come in here and I can teach it to him in 1 session or 6 sessions, I mean, at the most, sometimes with guys who have really long-standing issues and maybe some sexual trauma and stuff like that, it might take 12 to 15 sessions. But generally, most of my clients are 2 to 6 sessions, sometimes 8. And I see them go from being a 40-year-old virgin to having a great dating life and then a girlfriend and then a wife.
Yeah.
And I know that how important, that ability, being able to have intimacy in my life was to me. I just think I helped multiple guys do it. And then when they write me emails, because I always tell them afterwards, just stay in touch. Let me know how it's going. I answer all questions for free via email for all my former clients. And sometimes they'll come back for like a refresher, maybe once a year or whatever. But it is the most rewarding thing in the world. I actually have a little chills right now just thinking about it. And I tell you, I was 50 when I had my first book published, and I wanted to be a writer for almost 40 years by then, right?
Yeah.
I told you that story. As rewarding as it was, and as much confidence as that gave me in a lot of other areas of my life, nothing compares to having a really, really good session or series of sessions with my coaching clients and seeing how it turns their life around. I mean, I'm emotional just thinking about it.
It's the ultimate ripple, right? I mean, you're helping guide them into a new path for their life, and it's super rewarding. So you can just see it on your face. I mean, it just explodes how excited, the work, and the impact that your work, has on these people, which is great.
Thanks.
Yeah. So let's go back to your book and the project that you're working on now. So you got the book out, and what inspired you to write, Rock Monster? I mean,
so that's the name of my book, Rock Monster, My Life with Walsh. And I had always wanting to be a writer. And I was doing a lot of short stories, and most of my short stories were actually true stories that I was disguising as fiction because I just had, I was living the rock and roll lifestyle. I had a lot of interesting stories, and I was getting them published as fiction. And so I thought maybe I'll write a fictionalized story, like a novel about, a rock star relationship and just draw from my own life. But the truth is, I'm just better at writing memoir. I love reading. I don't read fiction. I'm like, how can I write a novel? I read like 1 novel a year. I read 49 memoirs a year.
Wow.
Maybe not. I read 50 books a year, but 25 of them are probably like on sexuality, psychology, that kind of thing, work-related stuff. And then the other 25 are memoirs, addiction memoirs or relationship memoirs or any kind. I'm addicted to memoirs. So I had actually thought, well, I can't do that because out of loyalty to Joe, it's a very personal story. And this is the story is mostly about my addictions, my dependency, mostly, largely about my dependency on him as a person, codependency, dependency on the relationship, on this larger than life figure for my own identity, and then dependency on substances. So it's about me, but there's no way to tell it without revealing a lot of personal things that went on between he and I, right?
Yeah.
And quite frankly, it helps sell the book. I mean, a certain number of people are going to want to read a really good addiction memoir, but a much bigger number of people are going to want to read an addiction memoir that incorporates, a lot of private details of a rock star that they're really into. And So I thought, I can't write that book out of loyalty to Joe, because we had stayed friends, and we broke up in for good in '95, but we had stayed friends, and I saw him whenever he came through Texas. We'd spend time. We even talked about dating again at one point in 2006. And then in 2012 or 13, I was just thinking about I had written a book, but it needed a lot of work. And I thought, I need to set this aside and maybe I'll write something else. And I thought, what am I really passionate about? And there were some aspects to mine and Joe's relationship, even beyond the addiction, that I thought these things don't get written about very much. The sexual incompatibility. And then a lot of just sort of the feminist angle. You know, a lot of women were in my position, whether maybe not with a rock star, but with a powerful partner, somebody who's just an alpha or whatever, and you lose, you know, or they just got married and had kids. How many women out there would say that you lose your identity when you get married and have kids, right?
Yeah.
So I thought it was kind of a universal theme, and I thought, not only that, but my story of addiction is, whether it's enmeshed with a portion of Joe's personal life story, it is my story. And my story of addiction and recovery are the most potent influences probably on who I've become as a person ever since. And if I'm going to write a memoir, which I just really wanted to do, it has to be that story. So I gave it a lot of thought. I probably spent 6 months every day rolling it around in my head. Do I have a right to do this? And I looked at it from every angle, and I thought, for me to not write the story would be like a fish refusing to swim for fear of causing a wave that disturbed a big fat whale on the other side of the ocean. I just thought, you know, Joe's so established. I'm going to be respectful. I'm not going to tell all her secrets. You know, if it doesn't fit the story, God forbid. Let me tell you, that book would have sold, though. I just told all her secrets. That book would have been a bestseller. But no, I mean, so I wrote it as respectfully as I could. And, but after about 6 months of thinking of it, I really realized I had to write the story in order to be true to myself.
Yeah.
In order to respect myself and my best gifts. My highest purpose, again, is with the purpose, right? I really believe that my purpose is both with the coaching to help others find the ability to be intimate, to establish intimacy, to forge intimacy like I have. But my medium, I'm also a writer. And my medium, it looks like right now that my intimacy coaching practice and my book of addiction and dependency don't really overlap. But it's also a story of my relationship with Joe. And how we had no relationship skills whatsoever, no communication skills whatsoever. We were very much in love. So it really was about a relationship and about intimacy. My next book is about what happened once I got sober and moved back to Austin, and that whole story that I just told you about, putting myself out there, making friends and dating and sex and intimacy until I found this relationship. And then that relationship had its own problems that helped me become a stronger, better person, a softer woman and a stronger woman at the same time. So that's the next book I'm writing. And that very much dovetails with my intimacy coaching practice, because it's everything that I learned through the course. When you read the second book, you're like, everything she's learning through her 30s are the things she's teaching in her intimacy coaching practice. So the first two books actually do overlap. The first book and my work overlap a little bit. The second book and my work overlap tremendously.
That's awesome.
Did that answer your question?
Definitely. Well, let me ask you a specific question about both books. What would you want people to take away from Rock Monster, and then the new book? What do you want them? You hope for them when it comes out for them to take away from it?
I love that question. So I would say with the first book, there's a lot of themes in there. There's a lot of, I think, important messages to me. But the number one has always been: people will always treat you the way they see you treat yourself. Because
great message. What a great message.
I mean, people read that book and they say, that was kind of an abusive relationship. And okay, Joe and I were raging addicts and alcoholics. There was a little bit of abuse that took place, right? Emotional abuse, and there was one incident of physical abuse. But I see the younger generation in particular. And I think it was my generation. I'm Generation X. And I think my generation, we we raised the millennials, right? So it's kind of our fault. We coddled them to death. And so they don't really have as little resiliency as I had. I mean, they don't have any.
Yeah.
They don't have resiliency. They don't have tenacity. We've coddled them so much that, and then we also kind of turn the world to crap for them. I mean, they can't. College is 20 times, it's 10 times more expensive than it used to be. The college debt and the loans, the interest rates are astronomical, and you know, just everything, you know. So we not only did we raise them in such a way that they're not really independent thinkers or self-starters, we gave them a world that's just a mess. So it's no wonder that they do have sort of a little bit of this victimhood identity, right? No longer. It's they come by it honestly. But at the same time, I came by my victimhood honestly to a degree. I mean, I was really beaten down emotionally at home by my mother. God love her. We have a wonderful relationship now. She's an incredible person. But she was going through a lot too, and it just kind of worked out that I was a sensitive kid, and I really absorbed a lot of that.
Yeah, we have that in common too. There's another connection point we have, you know.
Yeah.
So I understand that.
And wouldn't you say that some people let it dictate this victim mentality throughout their lives, and then others say, you know, I'm shaking that off. I mean, and for me, it literally came down to life or death. I was such a victim that I literally almost died for that identity. And I finally had to say, I can change things, because you know, it's not easy and you need help. But for the most part, you have to find the motivation and the tenacity and the temerity to do it on your own, to keep putting yourself out there and just say, you know. And what happened in that book, every time Joe was abusive or hurtful, or I ended up in a situation that was scary or uncomfortable or manipulative, I put myself there, because I was treating myself. I taught him how to treat me. I treated myself so badly back then. I allowed people to take advantage of me on a daily basis. Other people can't help but take their cue from you, and they will always treat you, maybe not the day they meet you, but pretty quickly. People are always, even subconsciously, figuring out who you are, how much you respect yourself, and they will treat you with the exact same amount of respect that they see you treating yourself with, and they won't be able to help themselves. The nicest people in the world will do it without meaning to. And they'll have to, and at best, they will have to try really hard not to. The nicest people in the world will find someone who treats himself with no respect at all, and it will take every ounce of energy they have to treat that person with respect. So I think that's just really key to that first book, is pay attention to how you're treating yourself, how you're coming across to other people. If you come across like a victim, that's how they're going to treat you. If you come across as somebody who's empowered, or at least like striving to be empowered, they're going to support you. They're going to treat you the same way. They're going to treat you with respect. They're going to, you know, defer to you at times. It's almost magical how it works. It's not easy, but it is a simple concept. And the second book, I'm going to say, I mean, I think new themes will come out as I get further into it. Right now, I've just finished the outline, and then I got sidetracked by a second project that's kind of taken probably the rest of the year. So I'll start writing chapter 1 in book 2 in January, probably. I think a lot of it is about, for me personally, finding this balance between being a strong, empowered person who can set and maintain boundaries, and also being a flexible, receptive, loving partner. Because I finally get to a point where I can have another relationship. My first relationship since Joe and I broke up in '95 was in 2007, right? So 12 years. And I was so concerned about being taken advantage of that I just was kind of a bit of a rigid. I could lash out. Like if I thought you were about to take advantage of me in even a small way, I might lash out. So it was about learning to be strong and flexible and receptive at the same time. A yin yang balance. It was all about me at that point, because that's the only way a relationship's going to work. You can't be too flexible like I was with Joe, and you can't be too rigid like I ended up being in this next relationship. You really have to know when to bend and when to step up.
Yeah.
So I had just started a yoga practice at the time, so there's a lot of metaphor. I learned a lot in yoga about, you know, you have to be strong and flexible. If you're just flexible, you're going to get hurt. You're going to pull something. You're going to tear something. And if you're just strong, you're going to do the same thing. You know, because you'll be too stiff. So
it's really the yin and the yang, like you said.
that,
Yeah.
yeah. It's about finding that inner balance. Yeah,
Wow.
which is, I think that's something that I will be striving to do for the rest of my life. But I think I got to a point through that relationship, because that's the other thing. I think we learn the most about ourselves in relationship, right? You can say, well, I want to. One thing I learned through my 30s was every date I had, whether it was a one-night stand or a 6-month relationship or a 10-year-long flirtation, because that was in there too. You learn more about who you are and what your weaknesses and your strengths are. And if you pay attention, and if you're journaling or in therapy, you can take those weaknesses and turn them around. But if you're not paying attention, if you're not, every time I would faceplant, I would be like, okay, maybe that guy was a bit of a jerk. Maybe he wasn't who I thought he was. Maybe he pretended to be someone he wasn't. But where did I go wrong in this relationship? What did did I expect too much, or did I expect too little? Because, often it's one of those two things. So you have to kind of be looking for your own, what did I do to bring this on myself kind of thing. You always have to have, that question, and don't blame yourself entirely, because it's usually not entirely your fault. But I think a lot of people, it's sad to me to see that a lot of people aren't able to do that these days, I think.
Well, I agree. I mean, one of the things I really admire about you, and just hearing more about your story, is that you're a constant searcher. You're looking for answers, and you're trying to arrive at solutions that fit you. And the like you talked about with the journaling piece, where you would go back and look at sort of those certain relationships and kind of why they happened the way they did. There is some real power in that, right? Success leaves clues in life and in relationships.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times taking the time to, honor that and, respect yourself enough to be able to record them and recognize those things as they happen. And then to throw yourself into the work that you do. And I mean, it just, the two ways you describe those books and what you want people to walk away from, it just, gives me chills. I mean, it's awesome, and it's going to benefit a lot of people for sure. I'm just really, really, enamored with where you have come from and what you've done and what you've accomplished. And I know it's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's bigger and even better things coming down the pipe for you. Let me ask you a couple of quick ripple questions, because I always like to finish this up, because I could talk to you all day. I mean, this is super, super fascinating, and we may have to have a follow-up interview at some point, because I know a lot of people are going to really respond well to this interview. But what do you think your superpower is now?
I'm going to go with tenacity, because I have become a much more resilient person.
Mm-hmm.
I will definitely say that. So, and if you want to get a book published in the publishing world has changed. You have to be resilient. So yeah, I mean, I hear people tell these stories about, oh God, I queried 50 agents before I got one. I'm like, I queried 150 agents. Like, I don't know anybody who queried as many agents as I did. And then of course, someone from my top 10 emails me finally, and he's like, oh, by the way, I'm interested in your book. But still, you can't give up if you want to get a book published, certainly. And then also, like, it's starting your own. I mean, you probably know better than I do, 10 times better than I do, starting your own business. You can't really give up, and you have to figure out, I think also I know myself. I really do. I know what my strengths and weaknesses are. And so when I'm starting a business like a coaching practice, I know that I'm going to be good at it. Right. And that's really helpful. Sometimes you don't know, and you should just go ahead and go for it anyway. But if you know, then that can be a superpower, because you're going to waste a lot less time. So I'm pretty focused. I have a lot of self-awareness, but I'm also tenacious, because I think, and again, I have props to my mom, because I know I said a couple negative things about her, but I get that from my mom.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Let me ask you, I mean, obviously you went through some really struggling times, but as you are coming kind of out of that, and you were sort of in, the recovery mindset, what do you think the best piece of advice that you received at that point for maybe someone that maybe is going through something similar right now in their own life?
I got a lot of good advice. There were some amazing people in that program that, I mean, but I will tell you early on, I know exactly when this happened. I had 1 year sobriety, and at 1 year I was still in Las Vegas. And at 1 year, my home group would ask you, once you get a year chip, they ask you to do a speaker meeting. And it was one of the most uncomfortable moments in my life because again, I'm up at a podium in front of a bunch of people who care about me quite a bit and have gotten to know me for a year. But I still had so much self-doubt and self-loathing. And somewhere in that speaker meeting, I said, I basically, you just talk about how you ended up, being an addict, and then what happened and how bad it got, and then how the program helped you. And in that process, I said something to the effect like, my life has gotten so much better in the past year. I don't feel like I deserve it. And that just kind of popped out. I didn't really think about it, but it's kind of telling, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Very.
And after that meeting, my friend Dave, just the most darling man. He was a very, very successful finance guy. And, my group was a bunch of Vegas, very eclectic people. We had a Mormon housewife, we had the construction worker, we had the half homeless guy, we had the stripper, and then we had the finance guy. And he comes up to me and he looks at me like I'm a little crazy. And he goes, "You're a beautiful child of God, and you deserve to be sober and have a great life as much as anyone." And like, I'm looking at this guy thinking this guy's got it all. And he was looking at me like, "Don't you know that?"
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, like light bulb, like I deserve a good life. That was just, and I questioned it every single day for the next 5 years. But I think that's something people don't hear enough, like you deserve a really good life. You really do.
I love that. Oh, that's fantastic. What would you like the next 5 years of your life and career to look like? I mean, you're this phenomenal writer. You're an entrepreneur in your own right, and you're looking to do some really fun things, I think, with the work that you've done so far. But what do you think that next 5 years looks like for you?
Well, I have 2 more books in me, maybe even a 4th that I know of. I mean, by the time I get the next 2 done,
Yeah.
I conceivably will have 3 more that want to get written. But I also really want to, I just love writing screenplays so much. And I just the other night came up with this. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I think it's a hilarious. And I'm not really a comedic writer. I write some funny stuff, but it's about relationships. So here's what I want to do. In 5 years, I'll be 60. My first book came out when I was 50. I want to write 2 more before I'm 60. So I'll have 3 books come out in my 50s.
Yeah.
And I want to write this screenplay. And it's a funny take on dating, sex, and intimacy, basically. So it'd be kind of like a rom-com.
I love it.
Yeah. So I just really want to pursue my writing. I love coaching, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully give it up. I'm on hiatus until I really make a big dent in the second book. But I will probably continue to take a couple clients, like the really challenging cases, like the 50-year-old virgin or the 5-year-old virgin. I love working with them, and they can be kind of challenging. But I'll just do that on the side, just because, like I said, it's very fulfilling. I just really want to pursue my writing.
I love it. I love it. Well, what does the ripple effect mean to you? You've had so many ripples in your life. Yeah.
It's about connection. You're not going to get, like, if you'd asked me, how do you want to become a success in your life? Do you want to sit at home and do it from the other end of a laptop? I'd be like, I'm fine with that. I don't ever want to meet. The few people I have to meet, like, it was excruciating. I can't tell you how excruciating. Just even speaking up for a couple of minutes in an AA meeting among 10 of my closest confidants was excruciatingly hard for me for years into it. Like and going out and making friends in a club when I wasn't drinking and they all were, but it's about connection. Like, we're all connected, whether we know it or not, whether we engage with it or not. You can sit at home and try to do everything through a screen, or you can go out there and meet people and experience their energetic body. While obviously podcasting is a lot easier through a screen, and a lot of things are, when you, and I think this pandemic's probably driven it home more than anything could have. Nothing replaces that genuine in-person connection.
Yep.
And so the more you put yourself out there, I think if you're an introvert like me, or a shy person, or a little bit insecure, what was even the question? What did you just ask me? What does
the ripple mean to you?
Yeah. I think that you would be shocked you put yourself out there even a little bit. I have found that sometimes it comes back tenfold.
Yeah.
So if you just face that fear, and the more people you meet, the more people you're going to, that are going to open doors for you in ways that you never, ever imagined.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a perfect way to answer with the, or to finish with this last question is, what kind of ripple can I create for you?
Oh gosh, I tell you, if you just gave my book to one person or recommended my book to one person that you thought might enjoy it or get something out of it, I mean, everybody's lives are touched by addiction, right?
Yeah.
If not in your immediate family, maybe your extended family or a loved one or a friend or an ex or a current partner, whatever, has some sort of substance abuse. It doesn't even have to be addiction, some sort of substance abuse disorder. If you were to pass my book on to one person that you thought might get something out of it, to me, that would, that would create a ripple effect. It
Done.
does.
I'm happy to do that for sure. I know several that actually think would benefit greatly from it for sure. How does our audience follow you on social media, or what's the best way for people to learn about the book?
Oh yeah, so pretty much everything that I do, from my coaching to my book and just some random essays and all my interviews, like this podcast, will eventually go on my
Yeah.
website, which is kristincasey.com. So Kristin is spelled with an I-N, KRISTINCASEY.com. And you'll find everything, links to where you can buy my book anywhere you can get books, like everything from Barnes and Noble to Amazon to your local bookstore, book people here in town. But anything you want to know about me, my social media links are all there. So
Excellent.
yeah.
Well, Kristin, it is an absolute pleasure to have had you on the show. I really, really appreciate the time, just how open and honest you were. I mean, this was so great. And I really, we're going to have to continue the conversation another time, because
I'd love
I
to.
look forward to the follow-up, and I wish you the best of luck as you move towards working on that next book. I know it's going to be phenomenal and great. If I can support you in any way, don't hesitate to reach out to me, but I just appreciate you. I really do.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been fantastic. And also let me know how I can help you out, because I've seen your earlier podcast, like I was telling you, and I'll definitely post a link to this one. But
Well, I
the work you're
appreciate
doing
that.
is fantastic. The work you're doing is really, really necessary. So I'd love to support it any way I can.
Well, I appreciate that so much. Well, and for our audience, thanks for tuning in to another great episode of the Ripple Effect Podcast. We'll be back again with another episode soon. But until then, Kristin, ripple on.
Thanks, you too.